Hey, I'm Scott,
And I'm Chris.
and this is Doxalogic, where we help you think with your Bible.
As someone who has been blood transfusion dependent and even had a bone marrow transplant, I have been told that having the blood of another in my body is a sin, and the blood that my body creates now makes me unclean. Do you believe that I am in some moral gray area? How should I reply to these declarations? Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I mean, we can say right out of the gate, that is almost for sure a Jehovah's Witness perspective or criticism. I don't want to be so bold as to say no other group holds it, but as far as what I understand in America, to hold a view that strong, and let it be said, that's not a Christian perspective, because Jehovah's Witness is a cult, not a Christian organization. And so there's just that right out of the gate, that this person has been, unfortunately, burdened with this declaration, but that's not a Christian perspective.
Yeah, there's I'm thinking of some passages in the Old Testament that maybe kind of lean into this a little bit. Going back to Genesis 9, verse 4, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. And so it was like this, Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. And so there's a lot of strength in language against eating blood, like in Leviticus 17,
Right.
for the life of the flesh is in the blood. That's the issue. And I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. And so there's a little bit of an extrapolation between sort of this idea of like intake of
Ingesting animal blood.
and a transfusion of blood for, medical
yeah.
survival and those kind of things. So minimally just would want to note the fact that there is some extrapolation taking place in that regard. And then go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Part of that set apartness for Israel had dietary function, but also a separation of pagan nations that dealt in. There was blood sacrifice in the Levitical law and the Mosaic law for the sacrifice for sins, but it wasn't the type of blood sacrifice that was like pagans on altars to false gods, that included child sacrifice. And so blood being required for the removal of sin is actually confirmed in the New Testament, but it's Jesus's blood that cleanses us from sin. And so there are parts of that section of the law that in the New Covenant we wouldn't be under the same type of restriction. So first of all, it's not even approaching a medical procedure as much as a cultic religious ritual procedure of blood, animal blood.
That's helpful.
So there's just there's a conflation, and there's a forced interpretation from, again, primarily a Jehovah's Witness background that can use Bible passages, but then they twist them to make them sound the same, and you are now defiled. It's very law, right? It's very
Right.
law oriented. You are defiled as a person in your body. And you're at risk of maybe judgment or something from the Lord for that.
And I think even recognizing that a version of it kind of comes up in Acts 15.
Yep.
When they're trying to figure out, what needs to be said to these Gentile people, and they're trying to keep unity, right? They're trying to keep this kind of cross-cultural unity with the Christian body that was newly developing, and so they make this kind of what would you call it? What am I trying to say? They get to a middle ground, essentially, right? They have this conversation where they end up saying in verse 28, "For it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay on you no greater burden than these requirements, that you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you keep yourself from these, you will do well. Farewell." Now, they were not trying to say that as part of like a salvation issue, or that as a Christian you should by necessity continue on with those things. I think Paul's really addressing this more from a wisdom perspective, right? And who he's addressing here. One wanting to make sure that there was unity insofar as they could establish that on some basic principles regarding idolatry, for example, and abstaining from expressions of that idolatry as was connected to the Old Testament law. But again, that's a far cry from someone who's getting a blood transfusion, and therefore, as it pertains to the promise of the gospel, there should be no guilt that's laid upon someone from dealing with blood transfusions.
Yeah, that is a pretty definitional of what legalism is. You know, that word gets thrown around too loosely, but that is a legalistic view of you are unrighteous or you are defiled. And how could you ever, I mean, when you've received someone else's blood for sake of your own health, and now you're told this, you could never undo that act. And so the conscience could be tormented in that. And there's no need for that because of what we've said in the scriptures that do talk about the lifeblood and not eating animal blood. It's connected to so many other things besides the medical procedures. So
and let me just give
receiving blood or giving blood for a Christian, you can be clean conscienced about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is maybe the closing word for this. Jesus is really clear on this. He called people to him. This is Mark 7. Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him. Right? And then, thus he declared all foods clean, for example, which is interesting. And he then explains how defilement comes. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person.
Well, there you have it.
There you have it.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to Doxalogic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rockland, California. To learn more, visit us online at doxa.church.